morning we're going to continue with our Stronger series. Couple weeks, well, it's been over probably about a month ago. My dad, who's the pastor, if you don't know that, if you're new here, my dad approached me and he told me and Josh that he wanted us to both to preach a sermon in this series. And it's a pretty long series, so he had everything kind of mapped out as far as subjects he was going to speak on. And he told me, you can look through some of these subjects, and if something jumps out at you, you can pick that to preach on. And to be honest, there really wasn't anything that he showed me originally that just really hit me, and I was like, that's definitely it. So a couple of weeks went by, and I just, started. I do a lot of other stuff around the church, and so I was doing that, got caught up in doing other things. And about a week and a half ago, we went to New Spring Church in Anderson, South Carolina, and it was for a big conference. New Spring Church is a huge church, and I think they have over 30,000 people that attend weekly. And so we were at this huge campus, and it was just a really nice thing to see, and it was a lot of pastors and church leaders there, and it was fun to be a part of. They had a lot of really good speakers, and the days leading up to it, I started thinking more about what I wanted to preach, and so there was this one word that kept popping in my head, but for some reason, it didn't seem to go with the stronger theme. It didn't really fit with me, and I kept thinking to myself, this doesn't really go with our theme of stronger, and so the conference starts, and it was kind of like the speakers that would get up, everybody kept touching on this one subject that I'd been thinking about talking about, and about the time Mark Driscoll was up there speaking, some of you may know who that is. He used to pastor Mars Hill Church in Seattle. He got up and was talking, and he was talking about some things, and my dad was sitting a couple seats down from me, and he was taking notes on his phone, and he passed me his phone, and it had the title of this sermon, and it was exactly what I'd been wanting to talk about. So I knew that was what I was supposed to talk about. So I'm kind of taking that as confirmation that this is what I'm supposed to say today. So if you have your Bibles, if you don't, you can look on the screen. We're going to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 7 through 12, and we're going to be looking at Paul. Paul wrote the letters to the Corinthian church, and so we're going to be focusing this morning on Paul. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, starting in verse 7, it says this: "You are judging by appearances. If anyone is confident that they belong to Christ, they should consider again that we belong to Christ just as much as they do. So even if I boast somewhat freely about the authority the Lord gave us for building you up rather than tearing you down, I will not be ashamed of it. I do not want to seem to be trying to frighten you with my letters. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. Such people should realize that what we are in our letters when we are absent, we will be in our actions when we are present. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise." Everybody, if you would bow your heads with me, we're going to pray for this today. Lord, we thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I thank you for the people that are here. Lord, I pray, Lord, that something I say will resonate with the people today, Lord. I'm nothing. I can't do this without your help. And I pray, Lord, that you let the people realize that if you can use a poor person, sorry old man like me, that you can use anybody. In Jesus' name, amen. How many of you this morning would be willing to admit that you have weaknesses? All right, some hands didn't go up. Your weakness is lying. Okay, so we have some liars in the room. Now, if you're married and you're sitting there thinking, I don't really know what my weakness is, turn to your partner and they will inform you what your weakness is. I can guarantee you that they will tell you what your weakness is. So if you're struggling with trying to figure out what it is, I seriously doubt it. Most people know what your weaknesses are. But one of the things that I love about the Bible, one of the things that I love about God, is that God continually used broken, weak people to do great big things. So the title of this sermon is Stronger in Weakness. We're going to be talking about being stronger in weakness. That may seem a little odd to you. That may not make sense to you, but hopefully by the time we're done, it will. So you may be sitting here thinking that you're not worthy or you don't stack up. That's something that I think of every day pretty much. I don't feel like I have what it takes. Feeling that way will do this to you. Feeling like you don't have what it takes will cause you to do this. It will cause you to prepare for a sermon all week long, be fully prepared for it, and no matter how much you studied for it, you will stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning on Time Change Sunday to make sure that you got it all down because you don't feel like you have what it takes. In case you didn't realize, I stayed up 2 o'clock in the morning. That was stupid. I stayed up going over and over. My wife kept telling me to come to bed. She gave up when she went to sleep. She didn't bother with me no more. But not feeling like you stack up or you have what it takes is something that a lot of people struggle with. Everybody has their weaknesses. I have plenty of them. I have more than I can even count. But I always love that God used broken people to do amazing things. You may be sitting here and you think that I don't have a clue what your weaknesses are. Maybe you're saying, Micah, I have a bad lust problem. You have a bad lust problem. You know who had a bad lust problem? David. David had a really bad lust problem. It was so bad, in fact, that he lusted for a woman so much and he wanted to be with her so bad, he had her husband killed so that he could be with her. That's hardcore right there. That's a really bad lust problem. This one, I don't think you'll probably admit. It's a hard one to do. Maybe you have a lying problem. Maybe your weakness is you can't tell the truth to save your soul. I'll be honest and tell you that there's been times in my life where I've struggled telling the truth. Anybody ever went through a phase of your life where you couldn't find the truth for anything? It happens. But you know who had a problem being dishonest? Jacob had a real bad problem being dishonest. A lot of people struggle with depression. It's a real big issue in today's society. There's a lot of bad things going on in our world, and it's really hard for you to cope with what's going on. Maybe you even have had thoughts of suicide. Jeremiah struggled with depression in the Bible, even had suicidal thoughts. Maybe you drink way too much. Maybe you would be what's actually called an alcoholic, for a lack of a better term. Noah was an alcoholic. He had a drinking problem. It's getting real quiet as I go along. I know you're probably scared to say amen because somebody will think you're an alcoholic. It's okay. Nobody's going to think that. Maybe you came to Christ or you're here and you feel like you're too old. You think I found God too late in my life and I've done so much bad things in my life and I'm just too old. Abraham was really old when God used him. Maybe you are a constant worrier. We got any worriers in the crowd? You worry about everything. Martha was a hardcore worrier. She was always worrying about everything. There's all kinds of people that God used in the Bible that had really bad past. Rahab was a prostitute. Moses had a stuttering problem. Joseph was abused. Job went bankrupt. The Samaritan woman was divorced multiple times. But all these people had one thing in common. God used their weakness for his glory. Now, we're going back to the Corinthian letter that Paul had written. And you notice I didn't include Paul in my list of people that had glaring weaknesses. Now, when most people think of Paul, he's not really known for his weaknesses. He's known for his gifts. Paul was a very, very gifted man. He's accountable for roughly 25% of our New Testament writings. It's pretty impressive. He was a great writer. He was a Roman. He was very trained. He sat under men of the Sanhedrin, and he learned. He was very good in debating, reason. Very, very intelligent man. And in this letter to the Corinthians, what's funny and what's ironic is even though he was so well-versed and people knew that he was such a smart man, he was defending himself to an extent. Even though Paul was such a strong man of God, and even though he was so well-known and people thought a lot of him, he was having to defend himself in this letter because Paul had a weakness, and he was humble enough to admit it. What I want you to realize this morning is that what God has purposed for you in your life is too big for you to ignore your weaknesses. If you ignore your weaknesses, you will never reach your potential. It's kind of like this. Do we got any people that like to go to the gym? Man, 4 people. Notice I didn't raise my hand. I used to love it. I got to get back into it. But one of my pet peeves of the gym, whenever I was going a lot, was there always seemed to be many dudes that be working out, and they walk out of the locker room with their tank tops on, real skinny ones, looking all fashionable, big, big old bulging shoulders, chest, arms, all that kind of stuff. And they always walk out in sweatpants. I always had sweatpants on. And, they were always working upper body. Every day they were taking the weight bench, getting in your way. They were always taking up all the dumbbells for curls. And every time you try something, you'd want to do something, you were finally going to the gym, and this one person kept using everything every single day. You noticed there was this one particular day, it happens eventually, where they'd come to the gym and they forgot their sweatpants. And maybe they mistook their sweatpants for the shorts that they walk out in. And they walk out looking like they're riding a chicken. And you realize they've never done legs at all. Never once have they touched a squat rack, except maybe to do curls in the squat rack, which that's a sin, just in case you were wondering. Gym etiquette, don't do curls in the squat rack. Okay? But they didn't reach their potential as far as their physique because they never worked their lower body. They thought their legs were just for walking. Couldn't do anything more than walking with them legs. And even when they walked, it looked like they were flimsy and going to snap at any moment. But I just got a picture of an exact person that I used to see doing that all the time. But Paul is saying that we can't judge people on appearances in this letter to the Corinthians. Now, Paul comes out. Let's go back to the first verse for me. Go back to that for me. He's saying that you're judging by appearances. Now, if you allow people to judge you based on your appearances, a lot of times people's weaknesses shine through, and it becomes part of who they are. And that's a bad thing whenever you let your weaknesses kind of define who you are. People have layers, kind of like an onion. I believe that was in Shrek that they were talking about that. So he's like an onion. He's got layers. If you don't remember anything else, go watch Shrek when you get home. It's a great movie. But a lot of times we feel like we're unworthy, like we don't belong. And that's a problem that we have in the church. A lot of churches create environments where people just don't feel like that they can come in and be a part. When you feel like you belong, you have confidence. If you don't feel like you belong, you don't feel confident about anything. And I feel like at our church, I feel like we're different, I like to believe that you can come here and you can find some belonging and that God has no favorites, just so you know. There's no class of Christians. You're either saved or unsaved. The same God that died for me died for the prostitute that's in downtown right now. He feels the same way about me as he does about them. So the fact that we kind of create this social country club atmosphere in some churches, that's not us here. If you feel like you don't belong and you don't feel like that you have what it takes, join the crowd. Get on the train. We all feel the same way. One of the things, I tried to think of something that I could relate to this, and this is about the best thing I could come up with. It's best to talk about my own life. So when I was 9 years old, I started playing the drums in church. And I loved playing the drums. Before I was the drummer in our church at that time, my mother was the drummer. Y'all probably didn't know that, did you? Mama can play the drums. She can play the drums good. Dad showed me how to play the drums, but Mama was better. We're just going to go with that because I love my mama. But anyway, so I started playing the drums when I was 9. And at that point in my life, probably hard for you to imagine this now, but I was extremely shy, like real quiet kid, real nervous getting up in front of people for anything. Whenever I was in school, when I was younger, I hated getting up in front of a class and talking. I had severe anxiety about being in front of people. So getting up on a stage to play the drums was a big deal in itself. So whenever I'd get up and play with the praise team at church, I'd get up there and I would like just lock in to the beat, and I wouldn't do anything else. Song would come on, and for 3 or 4 songs, here I am just going, that was me. I was right there. Now, whenever I was by myself, we lived in a parsonage behind the church in St. Mary's, Georgia. I would go over to the church just about every single day and play. And I could go over there and just have a good time. Nobody could see me, and I'd go crazy, just having a big old time playing the drum set. And as long as there was nobody around, I could really get down with it. For a 9-year-old, I was pretty good. And so I remember one particular day, I was in the church when I thought I was by myself. And I was playing, and I probably played for an hour and a half, just as hard as I could go, rubbing blisters all over my hands. And I was having a good time, and out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody. And I was like, what is that? It was the cleaning guy that went in our church. And I stopped, and he started clapping. He's like, why don't you do that in church? And I was sitting there thinking, I'm not doing that in church. What if I mess up? So I struggled with that for a while. I remember when I was 12, our church was asked to play at a state convention with the denomination we were in. And so I was going to be it was me and another guy played the drums. He worked at a paper mill there, and we rotated a lot. Whenever he was there, he'd play, and he was there about half the time. So I was only one able to go to the state convention, so I was a little nervous about it. And I was like, you know what? I was standing backstage. It was a big backstage area, this big convention center. We're getting ready to go out. And I was like, you know what? Today's the day. I'm going to have fun. So we got out there, and I walked out there with my drumsticks, a little chubby 12-year-old kid. And I lit it up, boy. I'm telling you what. I don't know if I stayed on beat, but I was having fun. I was having a good time. One of my best friends at the time, Jonathan was his name. Where I was sitting at on the stage, I was kind of sitting in like this back corner, and I could see him in the balcony. And we got done doing our set, and I look up at him, and he's looking down at me going. And that was kind of the turning point for me. Now, in my time since then, I've pretty much played, I'd say 98% of Sundays from the time I was 9 to I'm now 30. I'm 30. Feels horrible to say that. But I've played every single Sunday with some exceptions. And the prevailing compliment that I get as far as my drumming isn't, man, that's some really cool licks or a cool feel you did. It's, man, you have really good time. Really good time. And that's not cool. That's kind of like me to Don or Kevin and being like, man, that chord you hit was amazing. That sounded so good. You don't want to hear that. A guitarist wants to hear, man, during the offering, when Don's like jamming out. Y'all have noticed that, hadn't you? During the offering, Don gets a little bit free in his spirit. He starts going to town. I enjoy it. But instead of, that was a good chord. Man, you ripped it up right then, son. That's what you want to hear. But as a kid, I wanted to learn all these chops and licks and all this kind of stuff. And by myself, I could do them. But what I figured out over the course of my 21 years of playing the drums is that my strength in drumming is keeping steady time. I don't get off beat very often, and I'm not saying that in a bragging way because that's not really much to brag about. I can tell you there's usually 3 occasions when if you hear me get off beat, there's one of 3 things that's happened. I've either broke a stick, thrown a stick, or I've sneezed. If you ever see me before a service and I got the sniffles, pay close attention. I might get off beat because if you sneeze, you cannot. See? Right there. If you pay close attention and hear me sneeze, I might get off beat. It's impossible to stay on beat when you got to sneeze. But the thing is, I get that over the years I've had people want me to play with them because they say I keep a good beat, not because I do some crazy fills or anything. I feel like I've gotten better in that department. But when I was a kid, I thought that was a weakness of mine, that I was shy and that I couldn't really play all that fancy stuff. But what turned out to be my weakness and me being shy led to my strength as a drummer. Because I was so shy and backwards on the drum set, it led to me being a much better drummer today. And that's kind of the way that Paul is describing what he's talking about in verse 10. Let's go to verse 10. Paul is saying this. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. Now, did you catch it? Did you catch what he's saying about himself? He's saying that he's heard people say that, man, you're such a great writer. You write some amazing things, but a lot of people are telling him, you're really not a very good speaker. You're not real good. And, I've never really thought of Paul that way. You think of Paul and a lot of these great people in the Bible that, preached, and you're thinking, you just assume that they're great orators, speakers, just eloquent and all this kind of stuff. But people didn't like the way Paul spoke. He wasn't very good at it. Not very good at all. And there was a bunch of other preachers at the time that were great speakers. There was a man named Apollos. Anybody ever heard of Apollos? Be honest. Didn't think so. Apollos was a fantastic speaker. He drew crowds, and people loved to hear him talk. Just said he probably had big words, like used all kinds of grammatical stuff that sounded good for the time. Probably spoke in King James Version. I don't know. So people like to hear him talk. But Paul wasn't good. He wasn't a good speaker. So you know what Paul did? Paul wrote. He wrote a lot. Now, I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite basketball players of all time. Now, if I told you to guess, now, if you were in the first service, don't shout it out, okay? Don't ruin it. If I told you to guess who my favorite basketball player was, who would you think it would be? No, man. Show him. Put him up there. Spud Webb. Y'all know who Spud Webb is? Who's that? Don't know who Spud Webb is. Spud Webb was 5'7", $135 soaking wet. He was little. Spud Webb was short his entire life, and he didn't break any kind of crazy records in his career, but I always liked Spud Webb. I'm pretty sure that I was his height and weight when I was about 7. So at the time, that was about the time he was pretty popular, so I felt like, I can be like Spud. Not I can be like Mike, I can be like Spud. But growing up, he was extremely short. He's always so much shorter than everybody. But like most little guys like that, he was quick. He was real quick. He played with a lot of big guys that could dunk. And he said from an early age he wanted to be able to dunk. Now, he can dunk, or he could dunk. I don't know if he still can. And Spud Webb is known. Does anybody know what he's really known for? He won the 1987 slam dunk competition against Dominique Wilkins. You probably heard of Dominique Wilkins more than Spud Webb. He beat his own teammate, Dominique Wilkins, who had won it the previous year. Now, Dominique Wilkins said after the fact that he had never seen Spud Webb dunk. He was playing him. He was making him think, well, this little short guy's he's gonna compete against me. I'm the champion. And he didn't prepare, and the shorty got the best of him. Now, go home if you've never seen it. You can YouTube it, type in Spud Webb, and it'll bring up the 1987 slam dunk competition. It's pretty impressive. He wasn't just throwing down a one-handed slam. He was spinning, all kinds of stuff, 360s, all over the place. It was really, really impressive. Now, if Spud Webb had been 6'5", he's even said this, that he probably wouldn't have won that competition. Because he said, number one, he probably wouldn't even have been in that competition. He said him being so short motivated him. Motivated him to work out his legs, unlike sweatpant man in the gym. His legs out, always working his calves. And he actually, by the time he was 5'3", could dunk a basketball. Anybody in here 5'3" besides Daryl? 5'3", okay? 5'3" is pretty short to be dunking a basketball, okay? And it's really impressive thing. But his weakness growing up, being so short, ultimately led him to great things. One of my favorite preachers is a man by the name of T.D. Jakes. I've always loved to listen to T.D. Jakes speak. He's one of my favorites. And I've listened to him on many different occasions talk about his weaknesses. He's not shy about it. I don't know if you've ever heard him, when he's not preaching, he has a pretty bad lisp. He has a pretty bad speech impediment. Funny thing is whenever he starts preaching, it pretty much goes away. I really like that. But he talked about when he first started preaching that he felt like that he wasn't good enough, the same things that we all feel. And he had severe stage fright. He had a bad speech impediment. He was scared to death of talking in front of people. So he couldn't even use a regular microphone like this because he would shake so bad when he was up there talking. He had to start using a lapel mic. And I think he started a trend because about the time he got popular, everybody started using lapel mics. But he said many times over and over, and I heard him say this in an interview I watched this week, that the reason that he feels like that he's made it so far and God's used him so mightily is because he never felt like he preached good at all. And he said that one of the things about T.D. Jakes that I like is he preaches hard. Like he gets with it. And I like that. That's his style. He preaches hard. And he said, the reason I always preach so hard is because I never thought I preached good. So he preached so hard because he never felt like he preached good to begin with. Isn't that amazing? That something that was his weakness turned out that God used it for something big. If you're thinking right now, we all have multiple weaknesses. If you're sitting here thinking that I'm not really 100% sure exactly what my weakness is, I know I have them, but I can't pinpoint it, ask yourself this question. What's the one thing that you would ask God to take away from you if he would do it right now? That's it. That's your weakness. Let me ask you this question. I'll wait for an answer. Can anybody tell me any of the words that Apollos spoke or preached? Apollos, not Paul. You can't. I'm going to ask you this question too. If Paul had been a fantastic speaker like Apollos, do you think he would have wrote so much? Probably not. If God would have gave him the gift of speech, sometimes what God leaves out is as important as what God puts in. Especially in Paul's case, because he's responsible for roughly a quarter of the New Testament. We'd be missing so much good scripture and good insight from Paul if he had been a great speaker. All those times where he felt like people were ridiculing him, that he wasn't a good speaker, he could hear the murmurs, he would go and he would sit down in his quiet time and he'd write it all down. Because he wasn't a great speaker, he wrote. The thing is when you know you have a weakness and you feel like it will affect your destiny, that's when God begins to really step in and use you. A lot of us feel like we're inadequate. I feel that way all the time. I feel like there's no reason. I got so many problems, it's ridiculous. If you don't believe me, invite me out to lunch. I'll go with you. Hang out with me a little bit. I'll let you buy me lunch today. No big deal. Invite me out to lunch. Hang out with me for a little bit, and then within about 10 to 15 minutes, you'd be like, all right, if he can use you, then I can do it too. Okay? I kind of feel like at some point that somebody will walk up here and take this mic and be like, what are you doing? You don't deserve to be up here, but in fact, nobody that's ever stepped on this stage has ever deserved to be up here. A lot of people let their past and things that's happened throughout their life hold them back. We have a lot of young men and young married couples in our crowd, and maybe growing up you didn't have a father. Maybe you didn't have a father and you're, maybe a new father now and you're worried about not being a great father, but not having a father will probably ultimately make you a great father. That glaring problem, that weakness, that brokenness that you had in your life will cause you to become an even better father than what you could imagine. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 11 says this. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. God will ultimately fill the void between your purpose and your dreams and your weakness. You will never live up to your potential unless you allow God to use your weaknesses. A lot of times, I was talking to Sean in between service, and he made a point to me that he's heard somebody say that if you didn't have any weaknesses, you would have no need for God. You would have no point in finding God. And that's true. There's only one person that ever walked this earth that had no weaknesses. And he ultimately paid the ultimate price for each person that's in here. There's been a lot of things that's happened to me in my life that I didn't understand. I didn't know why they had to happen, but they ultimately led me to where I'm at right now. I'm not saying standing up here is luxurious or anything like that, but there was a lot of times growing up that I wondered why I had such a bad left knee. I mean, my left knee is horrible. I started having knee problems when I was about 10 years old. That's young to be having knee problems. I played sports, and I was actually really good, especially football. I was bigger than everybody, a little bit stronger, so I could push people around. And at a young age, even though I was really good, I started having problems, especially when I was in middle school. I kept having knee dislocations, and it constantly was happening. And I remember sitting with a doctor at Nemours Children's Hospital, which is a very well-known hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, and them basically telling me when I was like 12 years old that if I wanted to walk good for the rest of my life, I had to quit playing. That's a tough blow. And throughout my high school years, whenever I'd had to watch my friends play football and I couldn't do it, I'd always sit there, and it made me so mad. And I think about it, and, looking back on it, I used to pray about it all the time. Lord, please, I really want to play, and I feel like I'm missing out. And there was a lot of friends that I played football with, especially when I lived in St. Mary's, Georgia. There was on my one Pee Wee football team, there was 7 guys that played D1 football. It was like a hotbed for really good football players down there. So I watched all my buddies go play at Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, Florida, and I never got to even play in high school. And I'd ask God so many times, why couldn't I do that? If I hadn't have had bad knees, I might not be standing right here right now. You might not be listening to me talk about this. God used that weakness in my life to lead me down a different path that he wanted me to go on. I'm not saying I got it all figured out. I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means, but God has used so many of the weaknesses in my life for his glory, and I hope that he always continues to do that.